The Eyes of the Dragon is a dramatic fantasy story of sorcery, mythic creatures, and royal dynasties. While the plight of the story's protagonist, his unfortunate circumstances, and his struggle to reclaim his rightful place at the throne are the central focus of the book, there is an underlying critique of the deeply embedded, corrupting forces that so often find their way into power structures and politics. Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. If you're interested in Stephen King books, horror movies, and the broken-brained ramblings of a guy who read a fantasy novel and is somehow insisting it's about bad actors in politics and deeply ingrained systemic corruption, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. In this video, I will be discussing Stephen King's 1987 fantasy novel, The Eyes of the Dragon. Full disclosure, and I've made no secret of this throughout the course of my existence here on YouTube, the fantasy genre isn't really my vibe. I like the scary stuff. I'm a horror thriller fan. That's not to say that I don't appreciate the fantasy genre to some extent, but I've just never been big on all the Dungeons and Dragons, Game of Thrones, Wizarding World, hobbits, elves, and orcs and stuff. No shade to anyone who is into that sort of thing, though. I respect and admire all of you nerds for your genuine passion and commitment to involuntary celibacy. I'm kidding. I know your celibacy is in fact entirely voluntary because sex weirds you out, but that's beside the point. Now, when it comes to The Eyes of the Dragon, and hard as it may be to believe, were you to remove the magic and the fantasy elements and even the dragons, it would still be a compelling climactic story. In fact, there are surprisingly few dragons in this story despite what the title implies, and instead the focus is more on betrayal, espionage, and wrongful imprisonment. And there was, of course, all the hierarchical, patriarchal, institutional corruption stuff too. And so I found the book to be enjoyable regardless of the genre or subgenre the story is categorized as. But before I inevitably get carried away focusing on all the aforementioned topics, let's take a moment to familiarize ourselves with the plot of the story and what inspired King to write it. The Eyes of the Dragon, a brief summary. The passage through the castle is dim, but Flag knows the way well. In 400 years he has walked it many times in many guises, but now the passage serves its true purpose. Through the spy hole it conceals, the court magician observes King Roland, old, weak, yet still a king. Roland's time is nearly over, though, and young Prince Peter, tall and handsome, the measure of a king in all ways, stands to inherit the realm. Yet a tiny mouse is enough to bring Peter down, a mouse that dies as King Roland does. Flag saw it all and smiled, for now Prince Thomas, a young boy easily swayed to Flag's own purposes, would rule the kingdom. But Thomas has a secret that has turned his days into nightmares, his nights into prayed-for oblivion. The last bastion of hope for the kingdom lies at the top of the Needle, the royal prison where Peter plans his daring escape. History and inspiration. The Eyes of the Dragon was initially published in 1984 as a limited edition illustrated hardcover. The book was then republished in 1987 with different illustrations, then published again in France in 1995 with different illustrations, and once more in 2016 with, you guessed it, different illustrations. At this point in his writing career, King had dabbled in the fantasy world, but his output was of course mostly focused on horror thriller novels. His collections of short stories and novellas, on the other hand, had consistently bounced from genre to genre, never strictly adhering to a particular style or category. So this story's foray into the medieval fantasy realm wasn't all that surprising or unusual. When it comes to what inspired King to write the story, King's website provides the following explanation straight from the King himself. King states, quote, "Although I had written 13 novels by the time my daughter had attained an equal number of years, she hadn't read any of them. She's made it clear that she loves me, but has very little interest in my vampires, ghoulies, and slushy, crawling things. I sat down one night in our western Maine house to start this story, then called The Napkins. Eventually, the tale was told, and Naomi took hold of the finished manuscript with a marked lack of enthusiasm. That look gradually changed to one of rapt interest as the story kidnapped her. It was good to have her come to me later and give me a hug and tell me the only thing wrong with it was that she didn't want it to end." Unquote. That's some serious commitment to being a good dad. Imagine writing an entire novel just to make your daughter happy. Thanks for making the rest of us look like deadbeats by comparison, Steve. If you haven't read this book before, The Eyes of the Dragon is explicitly tied to the Dark Tower saga as well as to The Stand. And King had only just gotten started with the Dark Tower saga at this point, with the drawing of the three, the second of the Dark Tower books seeing publication only 2 months after The Eyes of the Dragon. The Dark Tower would of course go on to become King's epic fantasy masterpiece, and while the first Dark Tower book, The Gunslinger, had hit the shelves back in 1982, Eyes of the Dragon was his first full-on embrace of more traditional fantasy creatures, imagery, and themes. So that's the history of how the story came to be, and while King uses and utilizes classic fantasy elements in the foreground, I find there are some more veiled, Richard Bachman-esque critiques of institutional power structures lurking in the shadows. Bad actors and corrupting forces. For this section, I will be describing what I believe to be parallels and familiar moments from The Eyes of the Dragon, which, when viewed through the lens of global politics, are entirely apt and applicable. I won't necessarily be naming names or specific instances. Just be assured that these criticisms of political structures and of the politicians themselves that make up these institutions are not aimed at only one country or one party or another, but rather could be applied and are relevant to both the Democratic and Republican parties of the United States, numerous worldwide governments, and their inherent corruption due to the bad actors who are an intrinsic part of said political structures. Also, this upcoming tangent will 100% sound conspiratorial at times, and like I'm amenable to the idea of some shadow government or deep state working behind the scenes to influence elections, public perception, and civil unrest. And well, yeah, I might be more than a little amenable to those ideas. I'm not saying it's not a thing. Okay, so King Roland, father to the story's protagonist Peter, is a man's man. He's a hunter, a drunkard, a warrior. He isn't a tyrant, though. He is mostly beloved by his subjects, and while he isn't an intellectual by any stretch of the imagination, he is empathetic. He is a good king, or at least as good as one could hope for in a monarchy. Roland is resilient to corruption and self-righteousness, so naturally, he has to go. The force that pulls the strings, the manipulator, the ever-present shadow behind the throne has no use for a good king. In this instance, it is Flag, sorcerer and advisor to the king, whose corrupt schemes King Roland's rule is impeding. Flag can't further his agenda with Roland in the way. However, Flag understands that Peter, son of Roland and rightful heir to the throne, would present an even greater threat to his malicious meddling. Flag, who has been there since time out of mind, creating civil unrest, stoking the embers of discontent among the citizenry, and then subsequently fanning the flames he has nurtured to further his ends. But the focus of Flag's endgame, his goal, essentially amounts to causing pain and suffering just for the sake of it. He's an agent of chaos. He has no interest in accumulating further power and riches. A wise bat once said,
"Some men just want to watch the world burn."
And that is the essence of Flag. But Flag is a rare case. Typically, bad actors seek to increase their power and influence and wealth, not just to foment unrest and hardship for kicks. That is often a part of the plan, though. In some instances, these bad actors, those who aspire to power for power's sake, will strategize in whatever way will most likely facilitate their ascension to that of the wealthy elite ruling class, and they will trample, defame, and deter anyone who gets in their way. Much like Flag removes the threat of the noble King Roland and his even more progressive son Peter from his way and installs the more malleable, impressionable Thomas, people who aspire to power never want to allow anyone who may interfere with their conquests and profiteering a seat at the table. Allowing those who would put their constituents' needs above their own to take control or to interfere with their self-serving schemes would not be advantageous. So they will go to great lengths to deny that individual a position in the ruling class. Like, I don't know, maybe they would consolidate power in an effort to block a particular individual from winning an election, or continually slander an individual with false allegations in order to turn the proletariat against them. Or perhaps another kingdom would supplant the duly elected leaders of a rival kingdom with their own chosen leaders in order to subvert the will of the people. Or in the case of more brazen bad actors like Flag, attempt to imprison or poison those who come out in opposition against them. But regardless of their motives or tactics, this sort of deep-seated systemic fuckery is entirely common the world over, with some particular characters playing the role of Flag in one way or another with regularity and varying degrees of subtlety over the course of history. Final thoughts. The Eyes of the Dragon is in part a fantasy story, but that didn't make it any less enjoyable for me. The human struggles, relationships, and the good, the light ultimately prevailing was exciting and uplifting, as unrealistic as that may seem to my cynical, pessimistic ass. This is a short read, at least when compared to the majority of King novels, and I think the story is strong enough to provide a positive experience for most readers. You should check it out. I'm not sure what I'm going to be covering next week. It will either be the second Dark Tower book, which is entitled The Drawing of the Three, or I'm going to skip that one and move on to Misery instead. I don't know yet. I'm not sure if I have anything worth saying about The Drawing of the Three, and I only have a week to listen to the audiobook and then determine what it is I'm writing about and then write the script. And I'm just worried about not doing a good job, you know? The Dark Tower is super important to most King readers, and I don't want to screw it up. It's too much pressure. Oh, you know what? I'm actually taking a vacation with my family to the Adirondack Mountains for the entirety of next week, and so I won't even be back out of the woods until next weekend, so I guess I won't be making any videos. So if nothing else, I've inadvertently bought myself some more time to figure out what the hell I'm doing. Last week, my dog started barking at the end of my video, and someone named Phalix commented that they wanted to see my dogs. So here is one dog as a treat. Her name is Carmela. We call her Moo because all good dogs have a variety of nicknames that have no discernible origin. So anyway, this is Moo, and she's a very good girl. She is a very good girl. That's my good girl, Moo. New videos drop on this channel every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but not next Saturday. So click the subscriber bell to get notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Okay, goodbye. Say goodbye, Moo. Bye. Bye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.